let's see what happens when we mix the chemistry of three simple stories together. The first is that story about the man who comes to the spiritual master and he says, Master, Master, I want you to teach me how to read people's minds. The master said, well, yes, I can teach you that, but that's really not my cup of tea. I'm more about teaching spiritual enlightenment. But the man said, but I'm a merchant, and if I could know what people were thinking, I could know whether they were trying to swindle me or not. So the master said to him, well, first of all, before I teach you, perhaps you wouldn't mind going out to a certain empty house in such and such a place and stay there for 7 days and 7 nights and then come back and I'll be willing to teach you. So the man went out, and after 7 days he came back and he had big black rings under his eyes and he was staggering along with obviously a great deal of fatigue. And the master said to him, well, how did you go? And the man said, well, I haven't had any sleep at all because next door there are a couple who are drinking and fighting all the time, day and night, day and night. They swore at one another. And so the master said, well, you did know what they were thinking, didn't you? And then the man thought for a moment and he said, what was that you said about spiritual enlightenment? And then there's that old story about the farmer who went to his rabbi one day. Again, he had black rings under his eyes and staggering with fatigue. And he said, oh, Rabbi, you've got to help me. I live in a little hut with my wife and 4 children and my mother-in-law and my father-in-law and my mother and my father, and then the noise is terrible, it's always messy. I'm at my wit's end, I can't stand it any longer, help me, help me. And the rabbi looked at him and said, what animals do you have? And the farmer said, well, I've got a cow, 2 goats and 5 chickens. So the rabbi said, well, go home and bring the cow, the goats, and the chickens into your house. Well, the farmer wasn't too pleased about this, but of course he did ask the rabbi for advice, so he went back and he brought the cow and the goats and the chickens into his house. And the very next day, first thing in the morning, he was knocking on the rabbi's door. Rabbi, 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 I can't stand it. The cow is putting her cow pats all over the room. We stand in them and they smell. Oh, yes, 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 said the rabbi. Go home and take the cow out of your house. And so the very next day at dawn, there was the man again knocking on the rabbi's door. Rabbi, Rabbi, it's terrible. The goats are eating our bedding, the hay that we use for our bed. It's terrible, terrible. They're eating everything. Yes, 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 said the rabbi. Go home and take the goats out of your house. They went home. The very next day again he's back on the rabbi's doorstep and he says, oh, Rabbi, it's terrible. The chickens are roosting in our bedding and they're laying eggs in the most inopportune places. No, it's terrible, 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 Rabbi. You have to help me. The rabbi said, oh, yes, 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 I understand completely. Go home and take the chickens out of your house. So the very next day, the rabbi was back, the man was back at the rabbi's door, and the rabbi opened the door in his PJs, and he said, what is it now? And the farmer said, I've come to thank you. And thank you, thank you, thank you. My house is so clean and peaceful and quiet. And then finally, there's that story about the man who was the same in a terrible state of depression and tiredness, because he too had a household full of children, his mother-in-law and his father-in-law and his mother and his father. He could barely make a living, and he was so tired and fed up. One night he lay down in his bed and he said, God, I've had enough. Please, please take me to paradise. So a big booming voice came down and said, do you really want to go to paradise? And the man said, yes, I've had enough of this life. I can't stand it anymore, the chaos, the noise, the mess. So the booming voice said, well, it's not too far away, just a couple of days' travel. So that very morning, after another sleepless night, the man got up and he went to his wife and he told her I'm leaving, and he set off down the road. But of course, he spent the day walking along the path that God was opening for him, and came to evening time, so he was tired and hungry. So he sat down under a tree with a little pack of bread and cheese and a flask of wine that his wife had given him. And then he suddenly remembered, well, if I go to sleep, I won't remember which way I was going. So he took off his shoes and he put them out on the road in the direction that he was walking towards paradise. But by some strange stroke of fate, destiny, kismet, whatever you like to call it, through the night his shoes were turned around on the road. So when he got up in the morning and he slipped himself into his shoes and set off down the road, he started to think, well, this road to paradise is very familiar, really. And then in the distance, just in the valley ahead, he could see a village, and thought to himself, oh, that must be paradise. It looks very much like my village. So he came to the village and he went into the town square and thought to himself, well, this has got to be paradise. And then he sat down in the town square, but instead of there being all the cacophony of sound of the kids fighting around by the fountain and all the traders arguing with their customers that came along, there was this beautiful sound that he could hear the children playing, the fountaining, and all the merchants going about their business. And he looked around and he thought, how beautiful is paradise? How lovely it is. And so, of course, the day went on after he'd spent the day watching all of those things that go on. And so I thought, I wonder if there's a street like my street in paradise. So of course he walked down and there was a street just like his street, and he walked down the street and there was a house just like his. He said, this is very strange, but yeah, paradise, it's paradise. And then just at that moment a woman came out of the door of his house that looks very much like his wife, and she says, come on in, your bowl of soup is getting cold. And so he went into the house and he sat down and all the children were there, and oh, it was so the sound of the children slopping away out of this soup bowls. It was like the sound of the angels playing their harps in heaven. And so it went on, of course. The next morning when he got up, his wife gave him his little lunch box and gave him his tools, and he thought, well, heaven, you don't go to work in, oh, maybe you do go to work in heaven, I suppose you've got to do something. So he took his tools and his little lunch box and he went off to work happily. And from then on, nobody could ever convince him that he wasn't in paradise. So, when we mix the chemistry of these simple little stories together, what do they evoke for you? What is it that arises for you as a thought, as these mix in our beings and give rise to
I go, it could be worse. It's just the perspective of how to see things. And they go out to come back in and appreciating gratitude.
Everything is perfect, it's just the way that we look
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah. It's the same everywhere.
So, here's a question. Is this mind? Is it perception? Is it awareness?
I think it's our perception of what we see and how we think and how we act on what we're looking at, the situation we're in.
Knowing that that perception can change in an instant, isn't it?
Yeah.
In an instant.
That's right, it's all of that.
All of it.
All of that.
It
Yeah.
is.
Perception, awareness.
Yes. Yes. Can we pinpoint it to one thing? Can we say it's mind? Can we say it's perception? Can we say it's awareness?
It's a shift though. The shift has to happen. It has to be experienced. The shift has to experience to know.
And where does that take place?
You can change in an instant how you think about something.
Yes.
And that changes with awareness and with perception.
And your perception. Yes. Absolutely. Where does this take place?
I know it, but I can't say it. It's like someone last night was saying, I'm really depressed, I need to go to see a psychiatrist and I don't feel well and the way I look at everything is, I said, let's go for a walk on the beach. I'm sure, let's just walk on the beach and see what happens. And her whole perception shifted and she sat down to go home with a clear mind and all the troubles didn't exist. It's just I can't say what it, the whole thing, but it was just stuck inside to being open.
Maybe you're letting go of the personality.
Yes. And where does that happen?
Where?
Where does it happen?
Online.
It can happen anywhere, anytime.
It can only happen in one place.
Present.
Right.
Yeah.
Now.
It's a shift.
Yeah, that's right.
Now. Isn't it? The only place they meet, the only place it can happen is now. Isn't it? Because if we go on with that perception, like the snake that suppose that's a snake on the grass, it's going to take us into a course of action. But when we're totally present, it can shift.
Yeah.
And it does. Isn't that true?
And it's like magic.
Magic. Magic.